I noticed your nose was getting bigger during that introduction, by the way. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you, Ed, and the Public Policy Forum for this very high honor. And I congratulate my co-honorees for your remarkable contributions to public policy. It is truly humbling for me to share this stage with you. You're probably all asking, why a scientist amongst the honorees? Well, if you're over 45, and I notice there are a couple of you here over 45, you should thank a scientist. The average age of a Canadian, that was not a joke, by the way. The average age of a Canadian has increased by about 45 years. That's 3 years every decade since Confederation, and it is all about science. And if you buy me a drink afterwards, I will explain the details of that. Science is usually thought of as being detached from everyday life. But in fact, it has always had public policy implications. Consider Galileo and his dispute with the church, and for the record, I was not around at that time. Did the earth revolve around the sun or vice versa? Cigarette smoking and disease. That issue has occupied policymakers for decades, despite the epidemiological data going back to the 1950s. South Africa refused to accept the science that HIV causes AIDS. That was a public policy disaster that cost at least 300,000 lives. Despite the evidence, climate change remains the domestic and global public policy challenge of our time. And as we heard from Yoshua Bengio, new technologies like artificial intelligence are raising new public policy issues. My introduction to public policy began in 1998 when I was asked to be on a committee to explore replacing the Medical Research Council of Canada with a new agency, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. At our final meeting, the Minister of Health, Alan Rock at the time, came to hear our recommendations. He was so excited, he announced that he was going to establish an interdepartmental committee to study it further. You know the punchline. Well, I was so pleased. I turned to Monique Bégin, who was on the committee with me, the former Minister of Health and Welfare under Pierre Trudeau, and the minister responsible for the Canada Health Act, one of Canada's most significant expressions of public policy. And I said to her, "Isn't that great?" Well, Monique rolled her eyes and said, "Alan, in Ottawa, when you want to kill something, you set up an interdepartmental committee." My second foray into public policy occurred shortly after I became CIHR president, and Lisa referred to it. The discovery that embryonic stem cell lines could be derived from human embryos opened up the possibility of using these cells to cure human disease. But the use of human embryos is controversial. Faced with the absence of a law, I struck a committee to recommend guidelines for research involving human embryos. When we published the guidelines, a newspaper ran an editorial entitled "The Impatient Dr. Bernstein," charging me with usurping Parliament's role to pass legislation on that issue, which to date they have never done. What did I learn from this incident? First, science and public policy are not a marriage made in heaven. Public life is challenging. It is challenging to be under the microscope while attempting to reach consensus on complex issues in a country as diverse as Canada. I believe we owe a huge debt of gratitude to those who choose a career in public life. Good public policy, absolutely. Good public policy is key to a successful country. In addition to Monique, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to the many people who had the patience to keep me from falling flat on my face more times than I did. Many of you are here in this room tonight, and to avoid the risk of leaving somebody out, I want to thank all of you. Your mentorship and friendship have meant a great deal to me. I have been very fortunate to have been surrounded throughout my career by great trainees, by great colleagues, including my current colleagues here at CFAR, by a wonderful family, including my wife Joanne and some of my children who are also here. And I have been extremely fortunate to have been born in Canada. My parents both came to this country when they were about 5 years old in the 1920s. Neither one of them finished public school. My older sister is a doctor, my younger brother is a lawyer. I always thought we were an exceptional family, but I think what makes Canada so special and so unique is that our story is a typical Canadian story. And I think for all of us, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to this country. Back to science. I always get uncomfortable when I'm away from science. The process, language, and values of science are shared across nations. Science, therefore, leads to a shared understanding of our world and the galaxy we lived in, as we heard earlier today, and its problems. Science also challenges authority. Science is not about facts. It is about doubt. It is about overthrowing accepted wisdom through evidence. It is no accident that the motto of the Royal Society of London, the first club of scientists, is not truth or knowledge. It is take no one's word for it, nullius in verbum. That motto was a direct challenge to the absolute authority of the monarch and the church. In short, science is a powerful voice for open, liberal, that's small l liberal, democratic societies. In these troubled times, the voice of science and the voice of Canada are needed more than ever. Canada is a beacon of light. We are known for compassion, our diversity, our openness to new ideas, and the support of science and evidence. In what other country would the length of the census form become an election issue? Canada is also the country where CFAR began. CFAR was founded on the premise that convening the world's best scientists is essential to address the complex challenges facing science and humanity. Like CFAR, Canada can be a convener of the world's nations to address the global challenges of our time. We are the country where insulin and stem cells were discovered. We are the country where the breakthroughs in AI took place, as we just heard, recognized last month with a Turing Prize, the Nobel Prize of Computer Science, awarded to our keynote speaker tonight, Yoshua Bengio, Geoff Hinton, and their colleague Jan LeCun from New York University. All three CFAR fellows. And Canadian scientists have received 2 Nobel Prizes in physics in the past 5 years, including the first woman to receive a Nobel Prize in physics in the past 50 years. Absolutely. With the closing of borders and mines that are happening elsewhere, Canada has been thrust into the spotlight as one of the world's most desirable destinations for talent and the brightest young people eager to change the world. Canadians are used to being in the chorus. Now suddenly, we're on the stage, alone, and the audience is expecting an aria. We have a lot to sing about, but let me focus on 3 suggestions. First, double down on our investments in fundamental research. I waited this long to ask for money. Research not only advances knowledge, it is the feedstock for innovation. Just look at the boom in private sector investments in AI going on in this country. Second, in the global competition for talent, provide opportunities for our young people to change the world. As a student, my own decision to become a scientist was motivated by the desire to use my brain to improve humanity. I believe that more women and minority groups would choose a career in science if they also saw it as one of the best ways to change the world. And third, kickstart a global conversation on how best to harness the power and unifying force of science to address the global challenges of our time. Renewable energy, antibiotic resistance, urbanization, terrorism, environmental degradation, food, water, and energy security, rising income inequality, to name just a few. I believe we cannot let today's opportunity go by without leveraging Canada's growing reputation as a powerhouse of research and innovation to harness science to benefit the world. Thank you again for this honor.